Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to the Merryn Talks Money Market Wrap, where we talk about the biggest moves in markets this week and what is driving them. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb, editor-at-large for Bloomberg UK Wealth.
I'm John Stepek, senior reporter at Bloomberg and author of the Money Distilled newsletter.
So, John, I'm reading the papers this morning, and I'm thinking about all the podcasts we've done over the last couple of years and how quite often we're going against mainstream views and talking about stuff that maybe other people aren't mad for, etc. But looking at the newspapers this morning, it feels to me like everything is kind of going our way. The things that we expected to happen are happening, and other people are beginning to agree with us on things. So look, just let me read you a couple of the headlines that I'm filling out this morning, right?
Can I just say this sounds worrying?
I know. I'm worried too, and I don't know where we go next after everyone starts agreeing with us, okay? But here we go. Attack on undersea cables could cause civil collapse. Defense grandees have told the Prime Minister he's running out of time to protect Britain from catastrophic attack, etc., etc., etc. You know, we had that. We talked about that, a year and a half ago with Pippa Malmgren. Go back and listen to that, everybody. These big Cold War topics and the things that T talked about, the war in space, the war under the sea, the wars that you cannot see, and how interesting they are and how important they are for our future. IMF urges US to deal with huge deficits sooner rather than later as global Jet 2 GDP ratios hit 100%. Now, we have been talking about that over and over and over. We'll come back to gold, but gold is the answer to those problems. But here's another one that I really like. Startup extracts lithium in Durham. Lithium startup, I know, hoping to extract battery metal from brines beneath northeast England, says it aims to produce 20,000 tons a year within a decade. Now, we have talked endlessly on this podcast about the pyramid of need, right? About how we focus too much on things at the top, self-actuation, gender wars, culture, blah, and not enough down the bottom. Have we got enough of the fundamentals that make our society work? And we've talked a lot in particular about all these metals and how if we were really serious about things like energy transition, etc., we would simply dig up Bodmin Moor. Everyone laughs, and now what? It's not exactly Bodmin Moor, but it's outside Durham. These things are actually happening. And here's another one that we might come back to. Financiers sound alarm on standards after collapse exposes riskier lending. Riskier lending, eh? Private credit. Who could have guessed?
Never, ever. And also the fact that the money behind it is mostly coming from banks.
Yeah,
Which is...
yeah. Fascinating.
Well, there's the systemic angle.
So this brings us back, John. Every single headline I've just read brings us back to gold.
Yes,
The anti-crisis investment, the anti-AI investment, the anti-collapse of private credit investment, the anti-everything investment, right?
Yeah, and I think, one thing I found interesting is the correlations that we usually see with gold have largely broken down, and so people are sort of flailing around for reasons to explain why it's going up. And I just kind of wrote a piece yesterday looking at the previous times that gold has become a bubble. So the end of the 1970s and between 2008 and 2011. It's pretty clear those were both times where everyone was basically freaked out about what looked like a pending collapse in the established world order. In the 1970s, people often talk about the kind of British state essentially being on the verge of collapse, and some people even talk about possibly kind of civil war. And then after 2008, obviously the financial system actually did collapse and was then put back together with kind of string and sellotape, which led to the problems that we have now. So I think that's actually the best explanation overall for why gold is going up. And that at some point, either this stuff will get fixed, at which point gold will go down, and you'll probably wish you'd sold it at the top. But at the moment, it's still very hard to see what's on the horizon that could start that process of things getting fixed or reaching a more stable equilibrium again.
Yeah, it feels like we need to see more of a crisis before the political world takes this kind of thing as seriously as we think they should, or maybe they're taking it as seriously as they should behind the scenes, just not in public. I don't know.
I mean, I was trying to think about this morning, and I mean, taking it back to the UK, one of the points I think we've made here often is that the UK's fiscal situation is bad, but it's not desperate in relative terms. And the real problem at the moment is there's no sense that there's a pathway out of it that the government is willing to take. And by the government, I don't just mean this government, I mean the governments have not been willing to take.
Yep.
If someone actually looks as if they're going to grasp that nettle, and if that person can then also get it past their own, backbenchers and the voters, then I could see that being a kind of turning point. Or if it was if it was to happen in the US, I don't see it happening in the US right away, but there's no pressure really on the US to deal with this. But certainly, in the UK, if you got a sense that there was a pathway forward that was going to actually work, then maybe we could start to turn around.
Yeah, but the grasping of that nettle, I mean, we're going to have to get onto the budget in November in this conversation. The grasping of the nettle involves not just increasing taxes on the rich, whoever they are. It involves cutting spending, and also, if you have to increase taxes, increasing taxes across the board. It has to involve putting up the basic rate of tax. Nothing else can work, right? But what we're seeing at the moment, all the mood music coming out of the Treasury, is not really about cutting spending, a fiddle here or there, but that's not really what this conversation is about. It's more about the nonsense of those with broad shoulders who, as we often say, are using their broad shoulders at the moment to carry their suitcases to Milan, or to encourage someone else to carry their suitcases to Milan. So, we know this is all coming, and we can see it, going back to one of our favorite topics, in the housing market, which is pretty much certainly at the top end completely static.
Yeah, I mean, that's the statistics on London specifically that came out in the last kind of week or so were just really staggering. What was it? There was a line in this report, but I think it's Mollier, saying that basically, even if the land was free, it's not economic to build in London just now, because of, cost inflation, but also because there's no demand, because the demand has basically mostly been filled by investors, because you need a lot of money to afford a property in London. So, and even things like cutting back on the amount of affordable housing, or fiddling with the kind of unnecessary new safety regulations that have been panic rushed in, isn't going to do anything about that.
Yeah, this is the line from the report. Development costs are high, so it is unviable to build profitably in half of London, i.e. areas under 650 square foot. This is even if the land is provided free and there are no planning obligations. Wow.
Yeah, that's bonkers.
And I did speak to a planning lawyer relatively recently. He said there's just nothing happening in central London. Nothing at all. Totally dead.
It's one of these things where you don't really know what to say to that, because clearly the property itself is unaffordable. But if you then, no one can afford to buy realistically. But then if no one can afford to build more, then you're at a very, very strange kind of point. It doesn't seem economically rational.
No, so two things have to happen. It needs to be made significantly cheaper to build houses, which means a bonfire of the regulations again, as ever. Land needs to become less expensive one way or another. But crucially, one of the things that would be super helpful in the UK would be a significant rise in real wages. Yeah,
and I mean, unfortunately, real wages are starting to turn flat again, because wages are kind of slowly coming down, and even then the composition is very, very, very skewed. And meanwhile, inflation's going back up. I mean, hopefully inflation should edge lower towards the end of the year, as long as we don't get any more nasty surprises, which obviously is, no one can. Our history with nasty surprises is not great.
Well, with that in mind, John, actually, I wanted to point to the other outbreak of the recognition of reality in the UK. And that is that if everyone should go and look at this video, and in fact, we'll put a link in the show notes to the UK's big energy bosses talking to the parliamentary energy
I was wondering when you'd get to this.
Oh, were you? You thought I might get to it.
I was actually. I was thinking this would be one of your headlines before.
It was, but I meant to say it at the beginning. But I had so many headlines. I thought let's leave the best for last. But this is a genuine outbreak of reality, right? So you've got the big bosses at the big energy companies in the UK, and they are talking to the Parliamentary Energy Committee and talking about what they call the non-commodity cost of energy. Now, anyone anyone who's a long-term listener to this podcast will not be surprised by any of these things. Please do go back and listen to some of the podcasts that we have recently done on energy prices in the UK and how they work. But the key point here is, here's Rachel Fletcher, who's Director of Regulation at Octopus Energy. If we continue on the path we are on, in all likelihood, electricity prices are going to be 20% higher, even if wholesale prices halve. Now, the other representatives from suppliers, EDF, etc., who were there, agreed with this because it's just true that it is not the wholesale price of energy that is driving up electricity prices in the UK. And this has now been said very clearly by industry executives. So the idea that the government constantly puts out that high electricity prices in the UK are a direct result of changes in gas prices is now being shown very definitively to be not the case, or certainly not the case according to energy bosses in the UK. So this is, I think, a really interesting shift.
Yeah, as someone's said, the part that has been oddly quiet up until now out loud, and I'm guessing it's because, at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones who are getting pummeled by politicians when it turns out that they can't meet promises that politicians made up on their behalf. And it is being made up. I mean, this idea about the £300 reduction in household bills, I mean, and that has never been tenable. And it's quite a striking example. People kind of talk about how Rachel Reeves can't break the manifesto pledge on income tax, etc. And then, they're allowed to just blatantly make something up like that, which I find, and really not, I am not being partisan here. This is just an misinformation, and blatant. And I suspect it will continue to be repeated regardless of this. And I suspect we'll get lots of people in the comments for this particular podcast shifting the goalposts about, oh yeah, but if we invested X in the grid, it's only because we haven't done X, Y, and Z, which would cost billions and billions, or is going to cost billions and billions of pounds and get put onto bills. So, I mean, it's there are lots of things we're stating the factual reality. It doesn't seem to put a dent in it, but at least this is coming from the people who actually now have a good reason to push back on this, because they'll be the ones that take the flak when it turns out to be exactly as they've stated.
One of the things one of them says is that the way you could bring those electricity bills down is simply to put all those charges that come out of a variety of different types of regulation and political priority, to move those charges onto the general tax bill and off electricity bills, and that would be a clearer way to do it. But, still have to pay the money, right? Doesn't matter how that works.
Yeah, and I guess the problem at the moment is that the Chancellor's already struggling to know how to increase general taxation without having to add all the kind of indirect costs. So I very much doubt that she's going to go for that, unless she's looking for a quick way to bring down inflation, which, I mean, there's an option there. But I can't see that happening. I must admit.
But it's interesting, isn't it? And that suggests moving it onto the general bill, so then it would become another thing that came out of your tax revenues. And we're currently not recognizing that a very large part of your energy bill is effectively tax, if you were to look at it like that. Yeah.
Well, actually, the other thing that people sort of forgetting about the budget is that most of the forecasts at the moment assume, as they always do every year, that petrol tax is going to go back up in line with the thing that was promised, 15 years ago, and has never actually been done. So the assumption at the moment is that Rachel Reeves will get rid of the tax holiday on that Rishi Sunak put in, and also increase it. So it'll be interesting to see how she kind of deals with that particular issue as well. I can't see energy tax kind of going in on top of that, because you'd already have people very angry about increases in petrol prices, if she does decide that it's time to unfreeze the fuel tax.
Well, I suspect that whatever she chooses in this upcoming budget, there's going to be quite a lot of angry people either way, and we will be at the forefront of that anger, right? Commenting on it the whole way through. Anyway, at least things are going our way, which is not necessarily a good way, but they're going our way. Outbreaks of reality, we approve of those. If you see any outbreaks of reality around you, do let us know. Thank you for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Money Debrief. If you like our show, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to follow me and John on X or Twitter. I'm at MerrynSW, and John is John_Stepek. This episode was produced by Summer Sadi, sound design by Blake Mabels and Aaron Casper. Questions and comments in the show and all our shows are always welcome. Our show email is merrymoney@bloomberg.net.